A quiet evening in Hillcrest seemed like any other for Elijah Rivers, a man known for his kindness and steady heart. When he stopped to help a stranded motorist, Naomi Harper, change her flat tire, he thought little of it, just another good deed in a life full of them. But the next morning, a sleek black van appeared outside his home, its tinted windows hiding secrets that would soon unravel his world. What began as an act of compassion was about to pull Elijah into a web of power, danger, and choices that could change everything. What began as a simple act of compassion now carried whispers of something deeper, darker, and far more complex. But before we get into the details, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this one. Now, let's begin. In the heart of Hillcrest, a town where time seemed to move at its own gentle pace, Elijah Rivers was known as a man of quiet strength and unwavering kindness. At 37, he had carved out a life that many admired, but few truly understood, a life defined not by grand ambitions or material wealth, but by an unshakable commitment to helping others. As a mechanic, Elijah spent his days fixing cars, mending broken parts, and ensuring people could get back on the road safely. It wasn't glamorous work, but it suited him perfectly. To Elijah, every repair was more than just a job, it was an opportunity to make someone's day just a little bit easier. Hillcrest itself felt like a place frozen in time, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. Its streets were lined with quaint cottages, their porches adorned with flower boxes bursting with color. The air carried the faint scent of pine, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked pies from Mrs. Harper's bakery downtown. Life here moved slowly, almost deliberately so. Neighbors exchanged warm greetings as they passed each other on sidewalks, and everyone seemed to know everyone else's business sometimes before the person themselves did. Gossip traveled faster than any car Elijah ever worked on, weaving through coffee shops, church pews, and front yard conversations until it reached every corner of the community. Elijah fit seamlessly into this tapestry of small-town life. He lived in a modest house on the edge of town, a weathered structure with peeling paint and creaky floorboards that told stories of decades past. It wasn't much, but it was homey, a sanctuary filled with memories of childhood summers spent climbing trees and learning the value of hard work from his late parents. Every morning, long before the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, Elijah would rise from bed, stretch, and brew himself a strong cup of coffee. He cherished these early hours, sitting on his porch with a steaming mug in hand, watching the world awaken around it. Birds chirped noisily in the distance, leaves rustled softly in the breeze, and for a brief moment everything felt perfectly still. Once the sun climbed higher, Elijah would head into town, stopping briefly at the local diner. The staff there knew him well. They always had his usual order ready, a plate of scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and crispy bacon before he even walked through the door. Conversations flowed easily as he chatted with the waitress, Mrs. Jenkins, about the latest happenings in Hillcrest. Whether it was the upcoming bake sale at the church or old Mr. Thompson finally fixing the fence that had been leaning for years, Elijah listened intently, offering advice when asked and laughter when needed. These interactions weren't just idle chatter, they were threads that wove him deeper into the fabric of the community. At the garage, Elijah's reputation preceded him. Customers trusted him implicitly, knowing he wouldn't take shortcuts or inflate prices. His co-workers respected him not only for his skill with tools, but also for the way he treated everyone with dignity and patience. If someone came in looking worried because their car trouble meant missing an important appointment, Elijah didn't hesitate to stay late to finish the job. "It's what we do," he'd say with a shrug whenever anyone thanked him. For Elijah, helping others wasn't a choice, it was simply who he was. His evenings followed a predictable rhythm. After finishing work, he'd drive home along winding roads framed by towering oak trees, their branches forming natural archways overhead. Sometimes, He'd stop by the park to watch kids play soccer or join neighbors gathered around a bonfire sharing stories under the stars. On quieter nights, he'd tinker with projects in his garage, repairing bicycles for local children, or restoring old furniture he found discarded by the side of the road. Each act of service, no matter how small, brought him a deep sense of fulfillment. To outsiders, Elijah's life might have seemed ordinary, even mundane, but to those who knew him, it was anything but. In a world often driven by selfishness and ambition, Elijah stood apart, a beacon of compassion and reliability. He didn't seek recognition or reward. He simply believed in doing what was right, one selfless gesture at a time. Little did he know, however, that one such gesture, a simple act of kindness on a quiet evening, was about to set off a chain reaction that would test everything he thought he knew about trust, power, and the human spirit. The evening air was cool and still as Elijah Rivers drove home along the winding roads that cut through Hillcrest. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep orange and purple. It was the kind of quiet moment Elijah cherished, a rare pause in a busy day where he could let his thoughts drift. But just as he rounded a bend, something caught his eye. A car pulled over on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking faintly in the dim light. Elijah slowed his truck and pulled over without hesitation. He stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. A woman stood beside the car, her silhouette tense under the fading glow of twilight. As he approached, she turned to face him, her expression a mix of relief and unease. "Hey there," Elijah called out, his voice calm and steady. "Need some help?" She nodded quickly, her hands clasped tightly together. "Yes, please. I've got a flat tire, but I don't really know how to change it." Her words trailed off, and she glanced nervously down the empty road behind her. Up close, Elijah noticed details he hadn't seen from afar. She was younger than he'd first thought, probably in her late 20s, with blonde hair tied back into a messy ponytail. Her clothes, businesslike, professional, seemed out of place for this stretch of deserted highway. And then there was the way she kept looking over her shoulder, as if expecting someone or something to appear at any moment. "No problem," Elijah said, offering a reassuring smile. "I've changed more tires than I can count. Let me take a look." He moved toward the car, a sleek silver sedan, and crouched down to inspect the damage. The tire was completely deflated, its rubber shredded as though it had been driven on long after the air had escaped. Elijah rolled up his sleeves and got to work, setting the jack in place and hoisting the car with practiced ease. As he worked, Naomi hovered nearby, watching him with an intensity that felt unusual. Every so often, she would glance toward the trees lining the road or peer anxiously into the distance. When she spoke, her tone was clipped, almost forced. "Thank you for stopping," she said abruptly. "I didn't know what I was going to do." Elijah looked up briefly, meeting her gaze. "It's no trouble at all. Glad I could help." But even as he reassured her, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. There was a restlessness about her, a tension that went beyond the inconvenience of a flat tire. She shifted her weight constantly, her fingers twisting around the strap of her purse like a lifeline. "I'm Naomi, by the way," she offered suddenly, as if trying to fill the silence. "Naomi Harper." "Elijah Rivers," he replied, focusing on loosening the lug nuts. "Nice to meet you, Naomi." She gave a small laugh, though it lacked warmth. "Yeah, not exactly the circumstances I imagined meeting someone new." Elijah chuckled lightly, keeping his tone casual. "Well, life has a funny way of throwing surprises our way." Despite his efforts to keep things light, Naomi's demeanor remained guarded. She answered his polite questions with short, evasive responses. Yes, she was new to the area. No, she hadn't lived here long enough to get used to these roads yet. Each answer seemed calculated, as if she were carefully choosing her words. When the spare tire was securely in place, Elijah stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "There you go. You should be good to go now. Just make sure you get that tire fixed or replaced soon. The spare's only meant for short distances." Naomi exhaled sharply, as if releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you, Elijah. Really, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." He shook his head dismissively. "Don't mention it. Glad I was passing by when I did." For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Elijah saw something flicker in her gratitude. Yes, but also something else. Something harder to define. Before he could dwell on it, Naomi reached into her purse and pulled out a wad of cash. "Please, take this," she insisted, holding it out to him. "It's the least I can do." Elijah hesitated, then gently pushed her hand back. "I can't accept that. Helping out someone in need is payment enough." Naomi hesitated, clearly unprepared for his refusal. Finally, she slipped the money back into her purse, her brow furrowed. "You're different," she murmured softly, almost to herself. Before Elijah could respond, she climbed into her car and started the engine. She gave him one last look, a mixture of gratitude and something heavier, more complex, before driving off into the night. The next morning, Elijah woke to the familiar sounds of birds chirping outside his window. The sunrise bathed his modest home in golden light, and for a moment everything felt normal. He brewed a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch, savoring the crisp autumn air. But as his gaze drifted to the curb, something caught his attention: a black van parked a few houses down. It was sleek, polished, and entirely out of place in Hillcrest, where most vehicles were practical and well-worn. Elijah frowned slightly, but shrugged it off. Maybe it belonged to a visitor or delivery driver. Nothing to worry about. Yet over the next few days, the van began appearing everywhere Elijah went. At the grocery store, it idled silently across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. During his commute, he spotted it lingering at intersections, always maintaining a careful distance. Even outside the community center where he worked, the van sat parked inconspicuously, blending into the background until Elijah realized it had been there far too often to be coincidence. Each sighting sent a ripple of unease through him. Who were they? Why were they following him? The questions gnawed at the edges of his mind, building a tension he couldn't ignore. What had started as a simple act of kindness now felt like the opening chapter of something much larger and far less predictable. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Elijah's modest home, casting long shadows across the kitchen. He had just finished brewing his coffee when he noticed it again, the sleek black van parked at the end of his street. It was becoming impossible to ignore. Every instinct told him something was off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on why. As he stood by the window, sipping his coffee and glancing outside, a knock at the door startled him. Setting his mug down, Elijah hesitated for a moment before walking over to answer it. When he opened the door, two men stood there, their polished suits and sharp expressions immediately setting him on edge. They carried themselves with an air of authority, as though they were used to commanding attention wherever they went. "Good morning," one of them said smoothly, stepping forward. "Are you Elijah Rivers?" Elijah nodded cautiously, his brow furrowing. "That's me. Can I help you?" The man extended a hand, his smile practiced but not warm. "My name is Victor Langston, and this is my associate, Mr. Grayson. We represent the Harper family." Elijah froze, his mind racing back to the night he'd helped Naomi Harper change her flat tire. The pieces began falling into place, the nervous way she'd acted, the black van that had been following him ever since. But what did these men want from him now? "I'm sorry," Elijah said slowly, crossing his arms instead of shaking hands. "I don't think I understand. What does the Harper family have to do with me?" Langston's smile didn't falter, though his tone shifted slightly, taking on a more persuasive edge. Miss Harper spoke highly of your kindness that evening. She mentioned how you stopped to assist her without hesitation, even though she was a stranger in need. Such selflessness is rare these days, Mr. Rivers. Elijah frowned, suspicion creeping into his voice. It wasn't anything special, just doing what anyone else would have done. Grayson, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. His voice was calm but firm, like someone accustomed to getting results. Perhaps, but the Harpers believe in rewarding acts of genuine goodwill. That's why we're here to offer you something in return for your kindness. Reward? Elijah echoed, his skepticism growing. Look, I didn't help her expecting anything in return, so whatever it is you're offering, I'm not interested. Langston exchanged a glance with Grayson, then turned back to Elijah, his expression softening slightly. Mr. Rivers, please hear us out. The Harper family has significant resources at their disposal, and they wish to express their gratitude in a meaningful way. This isn't just about money, it's about opportunity. A chance to improve your life, or make a difference in ways you might not have thought possible. Elijah studied them carefully, his jaw tightening. Something about their words felt hollow, too rehearsed. He stepped closer, his tone sharper now. Let's cut to the chase. Why are you really here? Because none of this adds up. If all they wanted was to say thank you, why send two guys in expensive suits to deliver the message? And why park that van outside my house every day like some kind of warning? For the first time, Langston's composure slipped, if only briefly. He straightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. We assure you, Mr. Rivers, our intentions are honorable. Our presence here is simply a matter of discretion. The Harpers value privacy, both for themselves and those they choose to assist. Discretion? Elijah shot back, his voice rising slightly. Or control. You show up uninvited, start talking about opportunities and resources. But you haven't answered the most important question, what do you get out of this? Because nothing comes free, especially not from people like the Harpers. Grayson took a step forward, his demeanor shifting subtly. There was a hardness in his gaze now, a reminder that beneath their polished exteriors, these men weren't used to being questioned. Mr. Rivers, let's be clear. The Harper family doesn't operate like others. Their generosity is unmatched. It comes with expectations. Declining their offer outright may not be in your best interest. Elijah stared at him, his heart pounding. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. For a moment, he considered backing down, retreating into the safety of his quiet life. But then he remembered who he was, a man who valued honesty and integrity above all else. You can tell the Harpers this, Elijah said firmly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. I appreciate the gesture, but I don't owe them anything, and I sure as hell don't work on anyone's terms but my own. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got things to do. Without waiting for a response, Elijah closed the door, leaving the two men standing on his porch. As he leaned against the doorframe, trying to steady his breathing, he knew one thing for certain. His simple act of kindness had pulled him into a world far more complicated and dangerous than he could have imagined. The next morning, Elijah woke to the sound of birds chirping outside his window. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting long shadows across his small kitchen. He had spent most of the night replaying the encounter with the two men in his mind, their polished suits and cryptic promises lingering like a bad dream. But as he sipped his coffee, another knock at the door startled him. When he opened it, Naomi Harper stood on his porch. She looked different from the last time he'd seen her, more composed, but with an underlying exhaustion that hadn't been there before. Her eyes darted nervously behind her, scanning the street as if expecting someone to appear. Elijah, she said softly, her voice trembling. I'm sorry to show up like this, but I need to talk to you. Elijah hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. As she entered, the weight of her presence filled the room. She glanced around, clearly uneasy, before finally sitting down at the kitchen table. "I owe you an explanation," Naomi began, her hands clasped tightly together. "That night, when you helped me change my tire, it wasn't just a flat tire I was dealing with. I was running from people who wanted to use me against my father." Elijah's stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" Naomi took a deep breath, steadying herself. "My father, he's not just a wealthy industrialist. His business empire is tied to some dangerous individuals, people who don't hesitate to exploit anyone they can get their hands on. That night, I managed to escape them, but now they're looking for me again. And because of your kindness, you've become part of this mess." Elijah leaned back in his chair, trying to process what she was saying. "So those meant the ones who came here offering me money, they're connected to all of this?" Naomi nodded. "They're trying to protect me, protect us, but accepting their offer, it could pull you deeper into their world, a world you don't want any part of." The gravity of the situation hit Elijah like a punch to the chest. What had started as a simple act of kindness had spiraled into something far beyond his control. He thought about the black van, the men in suits, and now Naomi's confession. It was overwhelming, but one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Later that afternoon, Elijah drove to his Uncle Henry's house. Uncle Henry had always been more than just family, was a mentor, someone Elijah turned to whenever life felt too heavy to navigate alone. Sitting on the porch, surrounded by the familiar scent of pine trees and fresh air, Elijah poured out everything that had happened over the past few days. Uncle Henry listened quietly, his weathered face betraying little emotion until Elijah finished. Then, with a slow nod, he spoke. "Son, power is a strange thing. It can build bridges or burn them down, depending on how you wield it. Those Harpers, they see potential in you. They think they can mold you in whatever suits their needs. But that choice? That's yours to make." "But what if I make the wrong one?" Elijah asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "What if I lose myself in all of this?" Uncle Henry chuckled softly, patting Elijah on the shoulder. "You won't lose yourself unless you stop listening to your gut. You've always had a strong moral compass, Elijah. Trust it. If you decide to accept their offer, do it on your terms. Use it to help others, not to serve their agenda. And if you walk away, know that you'll still be the same man you were yesterday, a man who helps without expecting anything in return." Elijah sat silently, letting his uncle's words sink in. For the first time since this ordeal began, he felt a flicker of clarity. Whatever decision he made, it wouldn't be about wealth or influence. It would be about staying true to who he was and finding a way to turn chaos into something meaningful. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Elijah realized that the hardest part wasn't making the choice. It was living with it afterward. But no matter what path he chose, one thing was certain. He wouldn't let fear dictate his future. Elijah Rivers sat at his kitchen table, the early morning sunlight streaming through the window. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on him, but clarity had finally begun to take shape. After days of reflection, conversations with Naomi, and advice from Uncle Henry, Elijah knew what he had to do. He couldn't let the Harpers' resources go to waste not when they could be used to make a real difference in the lives of others. He picked up the phone and dialed the number Naomi had given him. When Victor Langston answered, Elijah's voice was calm but firm. "I've made my decision," he'd, without preamble. "I'll accept your offer, but only if it's used to build something meaningful, something that helps people who need it most." Langston hesitated for a moment before responding. "We're listening, Mr. Rivers. What did you have in mind?" Elijah outlined his vision, a network of safe spaces across Hillcrest and neighboring towns, designed to support marginalized communities affected by hate crimes. These centers would provide counseling, job training, educational programs, and more, all rooted in grassroots efforts led by local leaders. It wasn't about creating monuments or expanding the Harper family's influence. It was about empowering those who had been pushed to the margins. To Elijah's surprise, Langston agreed almost immediately. "Your approach aligns perfectly with what we envisioned," he said. "The Harpers will back this initiative fully." Over the next several months, Elijah threw himself into the project with relentless determination. He worked closely with architects, community organizers, and volunteers to bring his vision to life. In Hillcrest, an old warehouse was transformed into a vibrant community center filled with laughter, learning, and hope. The walls were painted bright colors, chosen by the kids who frequented the space. A garden sprouted out back, tended by neighbors who once barely spoke to one another but now shared stories while planting seed. Word of the project spread quickly. Other towns reached out, eager to replicate the model in their own communities. Each new center was unique, tailored to meet the specific needs of its residents. In one town, the focus was on providing mental health resources for survivors of hate crimes. In another, the emphasis was on fostering dialogue between divided groups through workshops and shared meals. Through it all, Elijah remained grounded, traveling frequently but always returning home to Hillcrest, where his modest house stood as a reminder of where he came from. The black van that had once followed him like a shadow now felt like part of the journey, a symbol, not of surveillance, but of the tools he now wielded to uplift others. Elijah understood the responsibility that came with wielding such power, and he vowed never to lose sight of his value. One crisp autumn morning, 5 years after that fateful night on the deserted road, Elijah stood outside the newly expanded Hillcrest Community Center. A crowd had gathered for the grand opening celebration. Children ran around playing tag, their laughter echoing through the air. Adults chatted animatedly, sharing stories of how the center had impacted their lives. Among the faces in the crowd, Elijah spotted familiar ones. Uncle Henry, Naomi, even Mrs. Jenkins from the diner. They were all there, united by a shared sense of purpose. As Elijah stepped up to the podium, the chatter quieted. He looked out over the sea of faces, feeling a deep swell of gratitude. 5 years ago, he began, his voice steady and warm, I made a choice to use an unexpected opportunity to benefit not just myself, but all of us standing here today. At the time, I wasn't sure if it was the right decision, but seeing everything we've built together, I know it was. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the crowd. This isn't just my story, it's ours. Every person who volunteered their time, every child who walked through these doors looking for a safe place, every family that found hope when they thought there was none left, you all chose to believe in this vision. You chose to believe that we could create something meaningful together. Elijah's voice softened, tinged with emotion. I've learned so much over these past few years. I've seen communities come together, overcome divisions, and find strength in each other. And you know what? None of it happened because of money or power. It happened because of kindness. The kind of kindness that starts small, maybe with changing a flat tire, and grows into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. He gestured toward the building behind him, its doors wide open to welcome anyone in need. This center and all the others like it are not monuments to me, or to the Harpers, or to anyone else. They're monuments to the human spirit, to our capacity for compassion, resilience, and unity. They're proof that when we choose to see the best in each other and work toward a common goal, there's nothing we can't accomplish. The crowd erupted into applause, cheers rising like waves. Elijah stepped back from the podium, his heart full. As the celebration continued, he found a quiet moment with Naomi near the edge of the gathering. She smiled softly, her eyes shining. You know, she said. "When I first met you that night, I never could have imagined all of this." Elijah chuckled, shaking his head. "Neither could I. Life has a funny way of surprising us." Naomi nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It does. But in the end, true change comes from collective effort from people who care deeply about making the world better." Elijah looked out at the bustling scene around them, watching as strangers became friends and barriers dissolved. He realized then that the power he had gained was merely a tool and amplifier for the kindness and integrity that had always guided him. His life had changed profoundly, but at his core, he remained the same man. Someone dedicated to uplifting others and staying true to his principles. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Hillcrest, Elijah felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. Even the smallest acts of kindness could spark monumental change. And as long as people chose to stand together, anything was possible. If this story resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever found yourself caught in a situation where kindness led to unexpected consequences? How did you navigate the challenges and stay true to your values? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story could inspire others facing similar dilemmas. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking stories that explore the complexities of human choices and their ripple effect. Together, we can create a space for meaningful conversations and continue to shine a light on the power of integrity, compassion, and resilience. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. We'll see you in the next video.